was good?
Yeah.
Oh, man. Get outside and
It's time to start the meeting, so I'll call the meeting to order. We'll all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Amen.
Tonight we have a proclamation for the National Public Safety Communications Week. So I'm going to read it, please. Whereas emergencies can occur at any time that require police, fire, and/or emergency medical services, and whereas when an emergency occurs, the prompt response of police officers, firefighters, and emergency medical service personnel is critical to the protection and the preservation of life and property. And whereas the safety of our public officers, police officers, and firefighters is dependent upon the quality and accuracy of information obtained from citizens who telephone the Gillespie County Communications Center. And whereas the public safety telecommunicators are the first and the most critical contact our citizens have with the emergency services. And whereas the public safety telecommunicators are the single vital link for our police officers, firefighters, and monitoring the activities by radio, providing them information and ensuring their safety. And whereas the public safety communicators of Gillespie County Communication Centers have contributed substantially to the apprehension of criminals, suppression of fires, and the treatment of patients. And whereas each dispatcher has explained compassion, understanding, and professionalism during the performance of their job in the past year, making them headset heroes. Now, therefore, be it resolved that I, Charlie Keeney, Mayor of the City of Fredericksburg, Texas, State of Texas, do hereby proclaim the week of April 11th through April 17th, 2021 as the National Public Safety Telecommunicators Week in Fredericksburg, Texas, and ask all citizens to honor the men and women who diligently and professionalism help keep our city and citizens safe. In witness hereof, I send my hand to the official seal of the City of Fredericksburg this 5th day of April, 2021. Someone's here to receive this, please. And just as an additional comment, I had the privilege of going up to the Communication Center during the ice freeze, and I will tell you, those folks were working very hard and very diligent in keeping everything as smooth as they could possibly do, not only in the city of Fredericksburg, but the county. So thank them again. Thank you so much. Okay, employee recognitions. Kent?
Okay, Mayor, members of the council, as you know, we use this as an opportunity to recognize our employees that we have received some compliments on, some praise on over the prior several weeks. And I know the council gets a lot of compliments about our police department. Our police officers are very courteous, are very professional, and we're very fortunate to have a really great staff in our police department. And I get a lot of positive comments that come via email and phone calls and letters. And I just happened to get one last Friday I wanted to share with the council. And this is involving Officer Brandon Griffin. I think most of you know Brandon Griffin. This individual lives in Blanco, Texas, Greg Stevens. And he says, good morning. Yesterday I was pulled over by this officer. The reason was, he said, I'd been speeding in a school zone. We live out of town. When I was pulled over, I was following turn-by-turn GPS instruction from my phone via my wife on our way to a doctor appointment where we had not been before. If there was signage, I missed it. The young officer was polite and deferential at every turn and let me go with a warning, which I appreciated. I also appreciated his professionalism. I hope this compliment will be passed along to him. Sincerely, Greg Stevens, Blanco, Texas. So this, again, is just one example of a lot of positive comments we get on our police officers that I wanted to share with the City Council and the citizens this evening. So, Mayor, that's all I have.
Thank you, Ken. Now we'll move on to public comments. Under the Texas Open Meetings Act, each person making a public comment has a right to publicly voice concerns or criticism of the city council, including criticisms of any act, omission, policy, procedure, program, or service. However, that right does not extend to public criticism that is otherwise prohibited by law. To ensure that all members of the public can be heard in a fair, impartial, and respectful manner, any public comment that includes defamation, intimidation, personal affronts, profanities, or threats of violence is prohibited. Okay, tonight we have a number of people who have signed up, and if for some reason I skip you or miss you, please let me know you're on this list, because I don't want that error to occur again like it did last time. We have several people who signed up, 2 people who signed up for agenda items, and other folks have signed up for this item. So the first person for this section, public comments, would be Tom Marshall. And if you'll let us know if you live in the city or in the county, would be appreciated. And then Angela Perch, you'd be next.
Good evening.
Evening.
I think spring is here. Last week I had a lot of brown shrubbery in the yard, but new life is coming out. I think the future is going to look pretty bright. And in doing so, looking back at the recent past, I have formed my own after-action evaluation of the COVID crisis. These are my observations. We singled out the right to life guarantee and forgot the rest. The fact that government officials gave themselves medical degrees is for a different discussion. I'm not here to say that protecting human life is not important. I'm saying that is not all important. Right to assemble, right to liberty, right to life as in making a living, and presumption of innocence were some of the rights that were trampled during the last year. My evaluation has these suggestions. First, in order to prevent any such future trampling of our rights, I would like to suggest that this council consider a resolution declaring Fredericksburg a constitutional sanctuary. Any mandates by any government agency that do not follow constitutional guarantees will not be followed. This would include emergency declarations where no emergency exists, as defined by the Emergency Declaration Statute. The stability created by this action would serve to draw businesses to our city, something I've heard from a number of sources as something we need. The action would also go a long way to settle any anxiety created over the last year that lingers in the minds of many people. Secondly, as for the concerns about the health and well-being during any pandemic, I would suggest that any unilateral solution to such problems demonstrates short-sightedness on the part of our leaders. We have a hospital that has a good reputation, but in this pandemic, as with all hospitals, they serve as the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff, which in some cases is very necessary. But if we do not build a fence at the top of the cliff, we are negligent in our duties. And how do we do that? There are doctors who realize that the best defense to illness is, well, a good defense. And
I don't mean to interrupt you, I didn't get the 3-minute timing, so I'm gonna let you go just a little bit longer on this.
okay, just about finished. A good defense, as in immune defense that we all carry in our bodies. If you do not know what constitutes building our immune defense, you should start asking before the next pandemic. At the very least, we need to look for multilateral solutions to problems when they're available.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Angela, I did fail to mention, we do have a 3-minute time limit. It will be on the clock, and you will get a 1-minute warning when you're down to 1 minute. And I apologize for not expressing that earlier, Tom. Angela, and then the next person after that will be Timothy Riley. Angela, please.
Okay, hello. Thank you all for listening to us. Saturday, I received this in the mail from CTEC, informing me that I would be receiving an upgraded electric meter. And so I don't know who's responsible for ensuring that this technology is safe, and whose responsibility is it to make sure that the citizens that are receiving this upgrade smart meter are protected, and that who's testing for the harmful frequencies. I have actual experience in being harmed by a smart meter. 7 years ago, I was in California and I began to have some severe health issues. And my husband suggested that I just get myself back to Texas. And we found out that there was a smart meter in our home in California. And we spent about $200,000 of our own money, not insurance, for me to go to doctors that would help heal damage that was done. The smart meter actually intensified my health issues. And I became a patient of Dr. Klinghart, who is a medical doctor as well as a PhD, and he's done extensive tests and studies on smart meters. And he found in his tests that when he exposes mold, which is in the environment, in a building, in a person, or pathogens in a person, and they are then exposed to smart meter frequencies, their health issues are exasperated, and that the smart meter exposure actually caused more damage to those patients. It was most severe in his cancer patients, and he has YouTubes and he speaks about this. I would like to know, because I left California to come here so that I would be protected. So I would like to know who's responsible for protecting the citizens from this technology that would emit frequencies. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. Timothy Riley, and then after that would be Robert Phoenix.
And then, I just like to. So, hello, thank you. I just want to start by, unfortunately, I wasn't here at the last meeting, and the last meeting I cleaned the microphone and dropped it on the floor, and had a misunderstanding with the Chief Wetz, and I just and now there's a trash can here, and that was the point. And we go through a lot of these documents to make sure that we're doing safe events, and it just seemed like the city didn't go through the same process that other events are going through. So just wanted to, if there was any offense taken. It's also a priority of mine. At the last meeting I spoke that we also include Zoom. And this is getting fancier and fancier by the day. And man, what a blessing the pandemic offered us. I kept saying that almost every meeting, that we can include Zoom as a part of our meetings now. So I hope that we can make that a priority. And then lastly, of course, I still personally believe that our agenda is pretty light on the items that are in our Path to the Future document. I still think that we can get more items that represent a very important document for the future of our city. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Okay, Robert, and then the next speaker then would be Jeanette.
Well, thank you for allowing me to speak tonight. I wanted to ask if any one of you or anybody out there has heard about the disaster in Atwater, California, the loss of life, the loss of business, the loss of their livelihoods in Atwater, California? Anybody? There has been no loss of life, livelihood, or business in Atwater, California. Why am I bringing this up? Because Atwater, California is a sanctuary city. They declared themselves a sanctuary COVID-free city a year ago. And they are still a sanctuary COVID-free city. They have not taken Gavin Newsom's money, and they're prospering and they're thriving. Tomorrow, I'm going to be interviewing the mayor of Atwater, and I'm going to place that interview on Facebook so you guys can get it right from the source as to how it's done and how it's impacted their community positively. What I'd like to do is I'd like to hand you their declaration and the exact wording that they've used. Can I do that, Mayor?
Sure, absolutely.
Thank you.
And you brought enough copies?
Everybody gets one.
Thank you. Thank you.
Which find there is the exact wording that they have used to declare themselves a COVID-free sanctuary city. Coalinga, California, did the same thing, by the way. So I just wanted to leave you with that because I think it's essential. Our businesses need to be essential, and they need to stay open no matter what. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeanette?
Good evening. Happy day after Easter, everyone. Tonight, I want to speak about free-informed choice. As of Monday, the eligibility to receive the Wuhan vaccine, I put that in quotes, has been now open for all adults. As many testified to the council and previously, the vaccine, quotes, in reality is not a vaccine at all, but rather an experimental biological gene therapy. It does not fulfill the legal or the medical definition of a vaccine, nor is it approved by the FDA as a vaccine. It is a completely different technology, and it does not do what a vaccine does. Currently, the shot has been given emergency use authorization only. This means that it has not undergone the many necessary safety studies, including the important animal studies. You always do animal studies before you go to the human studies, because if the animals die, which has happened in all the previous coronavirus vaccines that they've been trying to do, they did not do the animal studies with this. They skipped over it, gave this emergency use authorization, okay? This is a different thing than being approved. Okay, they have not done the long-term human studies. These shots are using technology that has never been used before, and there are many unknowns. It does not stop transmission, it does not prevent infection, and it is not known whether or how long it will offer immunity, which is one reason why it cannot be truthfully called a vaccine. Despite the fact that the virus has a 99% recovery rate for most people, and there are numerous highly successful, safe, and inexpensive treatments available, there is this aggressive, relentless push for everyone, young, old, healthy, and even those who have had COVID, to get vaccinated. When you consent to receiving this experimental injection, you are enrolling in a 2-year medical study. So yes, we are the animal studies. Meanwhile, the manufacturers of these injections are exempt from any liability should you suffer any damages. So, while everyone has a right to choose whether or not to receive these shots, I question if those lining up have been fully informed of the above mentioned critical information. All I know is that I've not seen these important facts included in the glowing promotional material published in the newspaper, in the county city websites, by the local health officials, and in Dr. Parton's presentations to the city council. These health experts have an obligation and duty to make sure the people fully understand what these shots are, what they do, and what they don't do. At the same time, I would also expect, just almost done, expect and hereby propose that our city leaders, city council, step up to direct that this information be clearly presented for the benefit of their citizens. And I also want to add that that the other grave concern at our doorstep, sorry, I'm almost done, I promise, is the Biden administration recently announced a push for vaccine passports, and Governor DeSantis of Florida has taken a real leadership role in rejecting this in his state. I respectfully ask our city to take a lead also to reject any implementation of mandatory vaccinations or vaccine passports in Fredericksburg. No person should ever be forced or compelled to take a vaccine, let alone an experimental shot. It always must be a free, informed choice. So you, our city leaders, take an oath to protect our rights. I support and encourage you in doing so.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Jeanette. Just to be sure, I want to be sure on this. Kimberly Lambs, you signed up for 7A, and Amy Booker. Okay, then come on down, Kimberly. Amy, did you do the same, or you just want to speak to 7D? Okay, thank you.
Hi. Hi, guys.
Good evening.
Charlie Keeney, first I want to say thank you for not virtue signaling the mask. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
An unlawful emergency disaster declaration is still in place in our town. All of you sitting on the city council have admitted, both out loud and in writing, that you are keeping our town in the state of emergency only to keep taking federal tax dollars. This is fraud. Committing fraud is a crime. Following unlawful orders from the DC criminals doesn't give you an excuse to commit fraud. Since the last city council meeting, there have been 0 cases in the hospital here. And our hospital is also an overflow hospital for San Antonio. To me, this is obvious proof that there are absolutely no metrics and no data that you are going to go by to remove this emergency order, because you just want the federal dollars. There's no emergency in Fredericksburg. By the way, the money that comes from the CARES Act was for COVID compliance. It wasn't for safety. The money for the shots, the tests, the PPE, and the signs to social distance, it was all about blind compliance and submission. The federal government said so. Just to be clear, we, all of us here, we're not going away. And we're not going to accept any type of new normal that you plan to enact in this town. We will not be canceled. We will keep our guns. We will speak out against this fraud and tyranny. We will not get an experimental shot manufactured by criminal corporations, and we want no part in any vaccine passport. And now I will speak to my fellow community members. There's an election coming up on May 1st. And when you go vote, just remember that the people that are sitting in these seats on city council have been active in keeping you locked down. They have participated in closures and restrictions on businesses, schools, and your life. They have helped to steal social interactions and community gatherings from your children. They have bowed down and complied with whatever tyrannical orders come from big government. They are willing to sell themselves out for a perception of safety. Do you really think they will stand for you and your interests? They have shown you where their loyalty lies, and it's not with this community. The federal government is now in a fast track for gun control and vaccine passports. If another mandate, which is not a law, comes down from the authorities. The people sitting in these seats have shown you by their actions that they will submit and they will try to enforce these unlawful practices on you, your family, and your business. It's time to vote them out. Fredericksburg, we need new leadership. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Moving on to item 6, the consent agenda. The following items may be acted upon in a single motion. No separate discussion or action on any of these items will be held unless pulled at the request of a member of the City Council. A, consider the approval of City Council minutes, February 22nd, 2021, regular meeting, March the 1st, 2021, regular council meeting, March the 3rd, 2021, workshop, and March 15th, 2021, regular meeting. Does anyone need to pull one of these items for further discussion?
Mayor, I move that we approve the consent agenda.
Here we have a motion by Tom and a second by Jerry. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? There is none. Motion carries.
Aye.
Item 6B, consider the approval of a resolution 2021-03R amending the order adopted February 1, 2021, ordering a general election to be held on May 1st, 2021, for the purpose of electing 2 city council members to the city council, adding the provisions of the conduct of such election and resolving other matters related to the conduct of such election. Shelley Goodwin, City Secretary, where you at?
This is all consent.
Oh, that was, those were all part, oh, goodness gracious. Okay, let's go back. Let me read them all. C, consider, I apologize, so C, consider, take action regarding the modifying the previously approved Wildflower Run and Health and Safety Plan for this event on April 24th, 2021. D, consider and discuss and take action regarding the approval of the street closures of the following events. I, the Fredericksburg Car Fest, closure of West Austin Street, North Adams and North Crockett Streets on Saturday, June 5th through 2021 from 6 a.m. to 4 p.m. The Crawfish Festival, closure of parking lane adjacent to Mark Potts, 1 Southbound Lane on Adams Street, beginning on Friday, May 28th, 2021 at 8 a.m. until Monday, May 31st, 2021 at 6 p.m. and West Austin Street between North Adams and North Crockett Streets beginning Friday, May 28th, 2021 at 8 a.m. until Monday, May 31st, 2021, 6 p.m. Of those items B, C, and D on the consent agenda item, does anyone need to pull one of those? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll move to approve items 6B, C, and D.
Okay, I have a motion by Bobby,
Second.
second by Jerry. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. All right, other actions, item 7A, and we do have public comment. I'm going to read it first. Consider approval of the annexation agreement with Seco Ventures related to the requested annexation of approximately 5.004 acres of land located on the west side of South Eagle Street, approximately 1,000 feet south of the southwest corner of Friendship Lane and South Eagle Street, previously discussed on March 15, 2021. Okay, and we have Kimberly, 7A. And you'll have 7 minutes, Kimberly. I mean, 3 minutes. 3 minutes. I apologize.
I'll take the 7.
Almost got you 7, but no, just get 3.
Thank you, guys. All right, I just want to say that you should not approve the annexation of land for this project or any project that looks like this. The proposed plan is a classic box living luxury jail lifestyle that belongs in liberal run cities like Austin, where this particular company is from. The proposed plan is a joke and an insult to the people of Fredericksburg. About 25% of this plan appears to be driveways and parking lots because you got to have some way of accommodating the hundreds of people who will be living on top of each other. The park only exists because this land must have a drainage system, and this is the company's way of dressing that up. It doesn't exist because they care about the people enjoying nature, and this park will be public, which means there is no private enjoyment of this park from the people that will be paying a pretty substantial rent to actually live there. It is clear, however, that this company does care about one thing. It seems that they care about their workers. It's obvious in the proposed plan. For example, the leasing office, where maybe 1 or 2 of their employees are going to be working 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, appears to be about 3 times larger than one single-family home. The leasing office also has substantially more green space around the building. Must be nice for the employees to enjoy. So this company obviously wants their employees to be comfortable, even though they will only spend a temporary part of their life in that leasing office. Meanwhile, this company expects families to pay outrageous rent for a tiny box house with a few sprigs of grass and spend their entire life there, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, living in a third of the area that their employees receive. The amenities are laughable. For example, take Lot A. One area with 4 proposed buildings with a total of 96 units. If an average of 3 people live in each unit, that means just in that small area with 1 pool provided with those buildings, 288 people are sharing that one teeny tiny pool. Imagine the summers in Texas. Gee, don't you just love paying expensive rent to have an amenity like a pool for 288 people? It's so relaxing. The homes on that plan advertise a yard. I don't see a yard. I see a tiny patch of grass barely big enough for a teacup-sized dog to squat in. Certainly, this is not a yard that dogs could run in or kids could play in. Maybe this company would recommend that the children play in the public park that they have created. It doesn't seem sufficient to me. This company from liberal-run Austin should take this plan and the rest of their company representatives who are here today back to Austin, where they belong. Thank you.
Thank you, Kimberly. Okay, Jason?
All right, thank you, Mayor, Council. How are y'all doing tonight?
Great. Real good.
So if you recall, we did visit this item last time. We had a couple issues. Unfortunately, I was not able to speak to y'all, so hopefully y'all were able to hear me kind of good over the phone. So I do know from that meeting there were several issues that you guys wanted to revisit in talking with the developers. So on your desk, I did print kind of an additional memo. This is extra information that came out after packets were distributed last week. So there was some back and forth between the applicant and city staff. So I'll break it down into sections. I'll kind of go over, hit the highlights. The first was parkland dedication. If you recall, there's 2 actual dedications that go on within the city. There's the dedication of land for future parks, and then there's the dedication of those amenities. So developers can dedicate the parkland and build those amenities in there and dedicate those to the city as well for maintenance over the life of that. In lieu of those dedications, the applicant can pay those fees. So the applicant has a couple of options right now. They can do dedicate everything to the city. We accept it, we maintain it, and they get the full credit. They can dedicate nothing. We accept nothing. Nothing's open to the public, and they pay full credit on the parkland. Or they can do what was proposed in the draft that you received, was a 50% reduction, since we're getting public land, but we're not getting the maintenance responsibility on that. So staff did highlight kind of what those fees were, what we were looking at. I know the applicant has made a change to their request. I know they are looking, I think they would request that full credit be given. So that's something that staff is looking for some feedback on moving forward with the annexation, or with the annexation agreement. The second was parkland parking ratio. If you recall, they're proposing 15 spaces max for parkland. And staff's recommendation at the last meeting was to cover that based on city code. So city code does allow me, the director, to kind of determine that parking. What I need to determine that parking is the overall acreage, the programming, what kind of facilities are there. So generally that's done as we're more kind of final in what that parkland is going to look like. So we don't really feel comfortable accepting that kind of change right now. We'd like to have some more discussions and move that park plan along a little bit more before we look at what those ratios are. Obviously, we're not going to look at 200 spaces for park, but we will kind of look at what's available, how many people may be utilizing, and what's an appropriate number. When we move forward on the rest of the document, outside of the parkland issues, there's a couple utility improvements as far as impact fees go. I think staff was looking for either the applicant was looking, we could pay those fees at a later date, but kind of lock them in under the current fee schedule. So staff's really not on board with that. We would have the option to let them pay those fees up front based on full build out, but normally we take those at building permit process. That way we know the exact impact on the system. So if they choose to push that off into future years, we would ask that those fees be in accordance with the fee, whatever that may be in the future. Another issue was roadway easements. They had originally added some language on regarding reasonable improvements to that area based on city or TxDOT desires. The new draft they sent back shows that as that whole section to be deleted. So I think staff's not real comfortable with that. We are comfortable with the addition of the term reasonable. So we may want to look at that a little bit further. And that is under section 6, roadway and easements. There was also a term limit that was proposed in here. It was a 30-year limit. After that 30 years, if nothing had been done on the project, any developer requirements or city requirements that were proposed in this development would go away, and the project could develop at whatever regulations are in effect at the time. Looking at the agreement, we did not have a lot of issue with taking that out. Once they come, this annexation agreement doesn't have a lot of regulatory information in there, requirements. Most of that's found in the PUD zoning that was approved for this. That zoning does run with the land, so in 30 years from now, if nothing was built, obviously we'd be looking at a different development, a different time, different place. So we're okay with removing that or supportive of that. The last issue was indemnification. Staff has a standard indemnification language that we put in all documents. I think the applicant was looking to remove that language. I don't know that staff is comfortable with that. I think if they want to propose some tighter language, we could maybe consider that, but at this point, we wouldn't consider that. So those were kind of the outstanding issues that were left on the table. Some of those are still there. We did kind of solve the language on the nuisance to make sure that we defined that. We knew that we were keeping that park open to the public and we weren't randomly prohibiting folks from using that park. So at this point, staff is just kind of looking for either approval of this document or some direction that we can go back to the developers and fine tune this if a decision is not made tonight. So I'm available for questions. The applicant is here as well. I'll be glad to answer any I can at this time.
Does the applicant like to make a statement prior to any questions? Thank you.
We have a short presentation that we put together that I'd like to present to y'all. It feels like the big question that we've been going back and forth with staff about is our parkland dedication fee. And I just wanted to have a quick discussion with y'all so that we were kind of operating off the same sheet of music. We really understand the parkland dedication fee based on the ordinance. It is two parts. First, dedicating land on site, and the second is the development fee. The intention of the ordinance from how we read it is that we're supposed to mitigate the increased amount of people that we're going to be providing in this area. And we're working really hard to try to do that. And we want to be able to kind of show how we're working on this plan and what our intention is so that y'all understand where we're coming from as we work through the rest of this. The first slide you can see is the existing site. This is the site area that we are going to be, that we've proposed, and you guys passed our PUD last week on. Next slide, please. So in a normal development scenario, I would have an engineered pond and an engineered channel. And what that is just capturing the existing 100-year floodplain and an inline detention, which is the pond that we represent here. Each one of those lines represents 5 feet worth of grade. And so you can see it just creates this big kind of channel through the site and a pond at the end. And we're not proposing that. So I wanted to make sure that that was clear in what we were proposing versus what you may expect in other circumstances. Next slide, please. This is what we're proposing. We're proposing 5.5 acre parkland. We've worked with our landscape engineer to look at drainage areas to try to capture more of the wet pond to provide more amenities as a part of this development, both for the use and benefit of the residents here, but also for the broader community. I just want to walk through a couple elements that we are proposing. Just so that everybody's aware. The first is we're proposing a regional trail. I've got an exhibit later on to show you all. As a part of Fredericksburg's future land use map, they've identified this drainage area that's going through our property as parkland. And we think there's probably no better way than to effectuate the desire that the councils put forward through their future land use map than starting a regional trail, hike, bike, and use trail. And so we're proposing here an 8-foot wide DG gravel pathway through our project that ultimately will allow for future connection as the project develops. Second, we're proposing pickleball courts, sports court area for public use. We're proposing a large 1/4 acre dog park, a lawn area for families. I like to call this the Camp Run Amok, but it's an area for kids to go out and throw the football and throw frisbees and have flashlight tag. We're including a play area. We have a community garden. Again, something that we would invite community members to be a part of beyond just our development. We're also including a picnic area as well. So I hope you can see that we're thoughtful about the design. Some of these elements are targeted at the broader community and not just our residents that are going to be in this location. Next slide, please. Here's a mood board that our landscape architects put together just to start kind of ruminating on some ideas for how we could execute this plan well. Next slide. This is a section cut. So you saw the red line going across our plan. This is basically taking that plan and then putting it in 3D so you can see some of the elements that we're talking about, including playscape areas, picnic areas for moms to watch their kids. We're talking about making not just a V-shaped channel, but actually going in and building that channel in such a way that it feels like it was intended to be there. The loop trail system that we talked about, and then we're looking at doing trees and other vegetation to create buffers between the housing and some of the other parkland areas. Next slide. This was the map I was talking about, the future land use map. So Fredericksburg's identified. If you can see the dots in yellow, that's out of the future land use map that is intended to be parkland in the future. You can see that connects to our property. And the green is the section that we're proposing to make into that regional trail. And then the blue is anybody's imagination. That obviously, once it connects to Friendship Lane, that trail could go anywhere, and we're just proposing a potential location. But we hope that you can see that that is a part of the plan that Fredericksburg's put together and said that they want. Next slide. One last thing I just wanted to highlight real quickly. There's been 2 PUDs that have been processed through council, and I just wanted the council and community abroad to understand what we're proposing relative to what others have proposed in the past. Our project is proposing 17% of our total area of our site as parkland. That compares to 13% for Frieden and 1% for Heather Glen. We're proposing to have our parkland as public use. Both of those PUDs were private. Frieden did include, I know there was some concerns about having live water or wet ponds on our property. Frieden has multiple wet ponds on their PUD in the parkland that they're proposing. And in both of those cases, council approved a 50% abatement, both in dedication and development fee. And I think it's clear from this chart that we're really trying to propose something better than what has been proposed in those two PUDs that were approved through council. And that's it. I'm here for questions.
Thank you. I'm going to start to my right. Tom?
Can you make that presentation? Can you give the council members a copy of that presentation, since this is the first time we've seen that?
That's not a problem. We're happy to.
Thank you. And I would like to, this is the first instance I've heard of the trail plan down there. So as far as that goes, right now I don't have any questions right now.
Okay. Bobby?
I'm with Tom. I really don't have any questions, since this is the first I've seen that presentation and heard these comments, so.
Jared?
I was going to, Andrea, on the parks and that, when you look at the parks, I don't want to go past you, Jason, on the parks and that stuff, when I look at a project like this, I don't see a whole lot of community input in a park like this, in a enclosed unit like this.
Well, I will say, I met with the developers through a Zoom meeting a couple of different times, and they went through the different elements that they were going to include in the park. And I think there are going to be some nice elements. Pickleball courts, for example, that's something we are in desperate need of here in the city. So I do think something like that the general public would use. I do think for the most part it would probably be the subdivision residents that are using this park, but there might be some general public use. I do know that, as Tom mentioned at the last meeting, we don't want to get a bunch of small pocket parks that the city's having to maintain. So, and I know that's not on the table right now, but that's something we do want to stay away from. We just can't be efficient enough with our staff to take care of those, so.
Yeah, y'all got enough to keep up with.
Sure.
No, thank you, Andrea.
You're welcome.
Holly?
Andrea, you can stay. I got a couple questions.
Okay.
So, on that potential trail.
Sure.
And that's on the land use plan, I'm assuming is where it is. And how does that make up with the parks plan? So I know we've got a parks plan, a land use plan, so.
Right, and I know there was a trail plan years ago, but I don't know that it was ever adopted, so I don't have enough information on, we haven't discussed, we brought trails to council before, but we've never actually approved anything in the last 5 years, so I'd have to look more about how that's going to connect and where we're going to get all the property to do that.
Okay.
I can respond
All
to
right,
that.
thanks. And then I have a question. Go ahead.
I can respond to that. We had a consultant about 5 years ago develop a citywide trails plan as a part of an update to our comprehensive plan. And that trails plan was never adopted by the city council. It failed to pass city council approval. So we don't have an official trails plan. We have a sidewalk plan, but not a trails plan.
Okay. And then I have a question for the developer. Looking at the amount of dedication fee abatement that you're going to get versus the total investment you're going to put into this project, I just question whether making it a public access park makes great economic sense. Because if I were a resident, I would probably not be happy about having to share the park that my rental fees are paying for with the general public. So I'm really on the fence over saying, just do your park yourself, part of your development, amenity for your residents, and move on with it, versus trying to do this hybrid model where you're trying to make it a quasi-public park. Because I'm just not sure that's really going to be all that effective for you, for your residents.
Yes, ma'am. The first thing is we will have amenities that are directly targeted at our development. So those will be things like in-ground pools, fitness centers, there'll be co-working space, there'll be other amenities that are private and are intended to be utilized only by our residents. The second thing is we proposed a public access easement because we understood at the time that the big concern was about parks having to maintain long-term the park that we were going to create. So it was an attempt to try to address that concern. We're absolutely open to doing a full dedication on site. We would need to reserve a couple of easements related to drainage, access, but we're happy to do that. The concern there was that then would turn maintenance responsibility back over to y'all's internal parks department, and we understood that was an item that was not desired at the time. So
I was actually proposing going the other way, to where you just keep it as an amenity internal to your development and don't make it public access, was my question. So what are the economics if it's not public access? I mean, is that a huge economic burden to the development if it's an internally developed park strictly for your residents and it has no public access?
yes, ma'am. I think practically two things. The first is the fee in lieu that we pay are dollars that we cannot invest into the area that we are planning for the park. And then more broadly, I think our comment would be, because there's been a suggestion about we'll just do it privately, put a fence up and don't allow access. From our viewpoint, we're excited about developing Fredericksburg because we see it as a community, and we want this to be an integral part of the community as this area of town develops. And so we see that providing park, providing commercial uses, that those go hand in hand, and it ultimately in the long term ties this project to the broader community.
So one of the PUDs that you referenced was the development that's right next door to where your property is, the 478-door R1A and apartment development. And have you really thought about the impact to your development if that starts developing and they have basically no park? I mean, it was 5 lots is all we got out of it, which is de minimis. That the stress that's going to be put on your internal park, if 478 doors has full access right next door to you, that sounds like that's going to be a lot of stress and wear and tear, and also a lot of potential nuisance for your residents from the development that didn't put in a park right next door to you.
Yes, ma'am. I would just say practically, unless I put a fence up, they're going to come anyway. So I'd rather have the public park, and I'd rather have the ability to pay for the really nice amenities that we're trying to do on site. Because I think unless I put a fence up, they're going to come anyway. And we accept that and are desirous of helping mitigate some of that. We're intending to provide a park, and we realize that if it's public, whether dedicated or through a public access easement, that the public will come and use it.
Question for Jason. The adjoining property, I believe, do they not have a dedicated park for their subdivision?
Pitiful.
I do not believe so. That was prior to my time, so I'm not real familiar with the details of that parkland, but I know that it was very minimal as far as the extent of that
Charlie,
park.
that was a very
Talking about Frieden?
bad deal.
No, the other one.
No, the Heather,
The Oaks and Windcrest.
Yeah.
No, Oaks, Friendship.
Yeah, they have a small park with a pool.
Okay, and that's just for them. It's not public,
No, it was supposed to be open.
open as well?
They said it was going to be open.
yeah.
So, Mayor, I've got a comment now.
Sure, please do.
Is the green space development in this PUD an amenity for the tenants, or is it an amenity for the citizens? One of the issues I think here, if I'm a developer, is the amenity going to set me apart from other apartment complexes in the vicinity. And I would say conservatively 80% of the apartments in the city of Fredericksburg are within a half a mile of this place. So, yeah, my view is that we need to develop parks, and that I was against the reduction in park dedication fees to Friendship Oaks. I think that we need the park impact fees to develop parks that the residents of the Seco Ventures development are going to utilize city parks, as are the residents of every development in town. They impact the existing parks, and that's why I think that we need to be very, I would like to do away with the 50% myself, but I think that it is good for the city to accept the park fees and put them to good use here. Because I don't care where people live, they are going to impact the park system of the city of Fredericksburg. They will use Market Plots, they will use Cross Mountain, they will use Lady Bird Park, everything that the citizens have already paid for. That's the whole purpose of an impact fee. That's why we have a sewer and water impact fee, because everybody who connects onto the system impacts that system. And the same thing applies with the parks. So, thank you.
Thank you, Tom. I think, parks are very, very important, not only for developers, but everything I read in my industry, that's what draws people to developments is their parks, whether they be community parks or private parks. And I feel their concept is well done. There is a lot of green space there, and I enjoy the part where the kids, if they'll go out, throw footballs and frisbees and do those kind of things. And I will share with you, and Tom, not to be in full disagreement with you, but I think those folks are going to be using that park significantly more. With little ones, they're not going to get in their car to drive to Lady Bird or to the Mark Plots as readily if they have a quality park there. I'm not going to say they won't do that, but I do believe they're going to use that park extensively if it's developed as the gentleman presented. So I think the impact on our parks, community parks, is not as significant if that park wasn't there. So I don't have an issue or concern with doing a bit of a reduction there on their park fees. So in that regards, because putting in a park, as you well know, they're expensive as heck. And the city's been trying to do something there for the property we bought years ago, and we've run into some obstacles there. And with private and community support, maybe we'll get something going. And I think it's very important for them to have that park, and I have no issues with them doing it in lieu of a park dedication fee, at least 50%, because I think it's a worthwhile project out there. That's all I got.
Well, I'm concerned that, I like Austin's concept. You go into Austin, you go into the areas there, whether you like Austin or not, I don't care. But anyway, you go there, but they always have a little park there and little communities, and they're just scattered all out through the city there, and the people can just walk to it. They don't have to get in their car and drive. And I think this park would be used more for the individuals that live there. So being able to get some funding in order to put into another park somewhere else, I would be more in favor of that, keeping at least a minimum 50%, and then using it, or even the whole thing, and putting it into a park for the whole city. We got parks, but you can always use more.
I'm willing to go with staff's recommendation on these items. I think 50% seems pretty good. I know that on the Heather Glen / Friendship Oaks, I would not call that a positive precedent to have been set. And if we had to do it over again, we definitely wouldn't have done that. And so I think the 50% mark I'm comfortable with. I'm not very comfortable with 100%, but I'm okay with 50.
Mayor Keeney, I've got a motion. I would move that we take no action tonight on this agenda item so that city staff and the developer have another opportunity to finalize the language of the annexation agreement, especially as it pertains to parkland, payment of utility impact fees, and the need for sidewalks. I would also like to I agree with many of the staff recommendations in the memo we received today. One other thing that I would urge the council to look at is with sidewalks, in looking at the plan from SACO, they have an entrance on Eagle Street, and I think from a safety and welfare standpoint, there needs to be a sidewalk on Eagle Street to connect to Friendship Lane. When we entered into the annexation agreement with Friendship Oaks, we required them to put sidewalks on the extension of South Creek Street, which is south of Friendship Lane. I realized that the 2015 sidewalk plan does not have any sidewalks listed on that plan south of Friendship Lane, but we made an exception in the Heather Glen annexation, and I think that where the south entrance to this development is at the city limits on Eagle Street. They're going to have to improve. There have to be some improvements made to Eagle Street, and I think for public safety of their residents, the people are going to use the back entrance and walk up Eagle to get to Friendship to go to Walmart. And I'd rather have them walking on a sidewalk than walking in the street. My motion is to take no action tonight.
I was wondering if we were supposed to include all of that.
Second.
That's why we're recording it, Troy.
I'm seconding the motion to take no action tonight.
Okay, we have a motion by Tom and a second by Polly.
Is there any chance of getting a light there at that Eagle and Friendship? Or?
I think that SACO has they're doing a traffic study. And
I see the strips out there.
We won't know what the requirements are for public safety improvements until that traffic impact study is completed. And that is spoken to in this agreement that kind of talks about when those triggers are for doing those studies and when those improvements need to come online. So that will be something that we do look at.
Okay.
May I make a comment? Time is money. Is it possible to have this ready by next meeting?
Guarantee it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is that satisfactory? All right, thank you. Okay, we have a motion. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? There is none. Thank you. We'll move on to item, excuse me, I scratched it out, 7B. Consider, discuss, and take appropriate action regarding the historic district guidelines. This would be with Jason and also with Anna. Jason, Anna's here first. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Anna Hudson, Historic Preservation Officer. Glad to join you this evening and talk about historic preservation, something that Fredericksburg does really well. So tonight, you have received the second draft. I'm assuming you've all looked through it extensively. Some of you have sent comments, and I appreciate those. So what we're going to do tonight is kind of a high-level overview of the project and get some guidance from you as we're still in the, this is not meant for adoption. This is just kind of giving you a status update of where we are. So again, the second draft, this is available on our website. The comment matrix is also there. So, and also I'm going to acknowledge that my kids are watching. Hi, kids. Mom's on TV, on the iPad.
That's perfectly fine. Thank you.
All right, next slide. So as I mentioned, historic preservation is something that Fredericksburg has done really well for generations. And the design guidelines is one document, one tool in our toolkit that we use to protect the district. Back in 2018, we did a historic resource survey to look at extending the historic district, which you did in 2019. And so this is an update of design guidelines. We have a 1997 document that the Historic Review Board uses, and that's become a little dated, so that's why we're updating it. And so the other aspect of historic preservation that's really important is passing on an appreciation for our architectural history onto the next generation, and we do that through education and outreach. Next slide. So the draft that you have is the second draft. We've made some pretty significant changes from the first draft, and the first draft was done in 2020, or May of 2020, and we had it open for comments and have had some public meetings and a steering committee. Next slide. And then obviously this is all being overseen by the Historic Review Board. So just so the public knows, these are their constituents. These are appointed by the City Council. We have 10 members on that board, and they are overseeing this process. We also are using a steering committee. Next slide. The steering committee is made up of a few members from the Historic Review Board, staff, and some people in the public that are interested, such as the Board of Realtors appointed a person. We have our local architect and a couple builders, and members of the Historic Society as well. So that we have a pretty good group of people that are looking at this document and helping us get it through the process. This is a public process. We actually started off in January of 2019 with our kickoff meeting over at the sanctuary at Pioneer Museum. And from there, we had 67 written comments. And so we started off really strong at that public meeting, getting public feedback. And then we released the first draft. HHM is our consultant out of Austin, and they released their first draft in May of 2020. Of course, we were right in the middle of the pandemic at that time. So we did do 2 public meetings via Zoom. I will say that the response or the attendance on those was lower than we expected given the initial response at the first meeting. We did a daytime meeting and an evening meeting via Zoom, but overall attendance was lower than we would have liked. So we kind of held off for a while, not knowing how really to do these public meetings during COVID. So in October, we had a public meeting as part of an HRB meeting, Historic Review Board meeting, and then followed that up with a 3-hour in-depth workshop with members of the steering committee and members that had shown interest before. So at that meeting, we looked at the first draft and really kind of dove into each section and got a lot of feedback there. So then we left the comments open and finally submitted our comments back to the consultants in January. Next slide. So then in February, So just to say that we finally gave our feedback to the consultants so they could give us back their final draft. And so our contract with the consultants is complete. We have paid them. They have provided this document. It is now ours to adopt, amend, put on the shelf. Whatever we want to do with it, it's ours now. It's paid for. So it's up to staff. Hi, staff, to amend that document. So any changes that are made will be up to staff to make those changes in the large Word document. End of last month, we had another steering committee meeting to look at this second draft, and now tonight, doing our presentation to bring you up to date. We still want to have another public meeting. I'll be asking for some feedback on that. And then, depending on how much feedback we get, and how quickly I'm able to make those edits and changes, we are looking at possible adoption in summer. And then once the document is adopted, we do plan to go meet with the interest groups. I mean, the Board of Realtors, the architects groups that have a lunch and learn, and chamber, any interested members members of the community to explain the document and how to use it. Next slide. So tonight, there are 4 things that we really want to make sure you're on board with this document. And the first is to understand that This document is both guidelines and standards. So guidelines being recommendations and standards being requirements. Also, as part of the adoption process, we are going to have to bring back some amendments to our historic preservation ordinance, working with the city attorney on that. So the plan is to amend the ordinance, and then the design guidelines will be an appendix to that ordinance. There's a few other things that we need to change in the ordinance as well. The other item that we want to make sure you're aware of is that in the design guidelines, we're looking at the development pattern of Fredericksburg, and we're looking at lot coverage, which is something that was never really discussed in the 1997 design guidelines. And then we also want to hear from you how you want us to engage the public with our public input process. If that's a workshop, open house, online surveys, etc. So next slide. So again, this document provides both guidelines and recommendations, and they adjust based on the rating of the property. Next slide. So we have through the Historic Resource Survey, we give each property a rating, either high, medium, or low. So a high rated structure would be what you could think of a landmark. It's in really good shape, it's not been heavily altered, and it's a really important structure either because of somebody that lived there or the architecture. There's different reasons that something could be high rated, but if it is high rated, then it requires more protection than a low rated property. So we are treating them differently, high, medium, and low. And we've also added terminology called visibility from public right-of-way. We've kind of done this as a practice at the Historic Review Board, but now we're codifying that to say some things are not required if it's not visible from the right-of-way. Next slide. And I just want to make note that we follow the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation. The Secretary of the Interior, these standards are the Bible for historic preservation. They're 10 standards that all states use, or municipalities use. It's an umbrella document, really, because they're pretty generic in their terminology. Next slide. But they are kind of the guiding document. So our guidelines can't really contradict the Secretary of the Interior standards. Next slide. So we are a certified local government, and this is a program that's administered by the National Park Service at the federal level, and then at the state level, the Texas Historical Commission. So we applied for this several years ago and got the designation, but it means that we do have to follow certain standards, and following the Secretary of the Interior standards is one of those. As being a CLG, it gives us access to technical assistance and a preservation network and a grant program. So that's just overarching to say that we can't just make up any willy-nilly design guideline that we want. We actually have to get them approved by the CLG program at the Texas Historical Commission. Next slide. One of the things that we did in this document made from the first draft to the second draft is citing the Secretary of the Interior standards. So, for example, if we have a requirement for maintenance to say preserve and maintain historic fences and walls, we're going to cite the Secretary of the Interior standard that requirement is related to. Next slide. So that's kind of the recap of standards versus guidelines. The next thing would be the preservation ordinance. And when we amend the ordinance and with the adoption of the design guidelines, we want to include a way for the Historic Review Board to give exceptions to those standards. We understand that it's a standard, it's a rule, but there are certain times that rules need to be bent a little bit. And so we want to clarify when the Historic Review Board should be able to waive the standard. We will also make the design guidelines, the standards, an appendix to the Historic Preservation Ordinance. And one thing that we are looking at is the membership of the Historic Review Board is unlike other city boards. We have 7 regular members with 3 alternates. And it can be really hard to juggle for the chair as members have to abstain from a vote, or somebody comes in late, and it just kind of jumbles up the meeting. So we're proposing going to a 9-member board, so to have an odd number, which is more in keeping with other boards and commissions. One other part of the ordinance that we'll have to change is to update the landmark designation process. So you might remember that the state, and the last time they met, changed the way that local municipalities can create a historic landmark. So we just need our language to match their language. We need our ordinance to meet the state statute. Next slide. So again, with exceptions, we know that there are a few, particular cases where the board would need to be able to go outside of the standards when they can't meet the spirit of the Secretary of Indian standard, but that the project is still worthwhile. So I think we use the Nimitz or the Pacific War Museum as an example, right? That's in the historic district, but clearly different scale, a very important building. So it was worthwhile to approve it, even though it may not have met the standards of the design guidelines. Next slide. Oops, go ahead and skip that one. Next slide. Next slide. This is in your packet, dealing with additions. We've clarified how to allow some additions with the concept of a hyphen. So this was a really large project that got approved, but it used a hyphen. Sorry, a little bit more technical that I want to get into. Next slide. Okay. So this document attempts to place requirements that are in keeping with the historical lot development patterns that might be more restrictive than the base zoning. So such as requiring parking at the rear and spacing new construction 15 foot behind the existing buildings, and limiting the size of new auxiliary structures in R1. Next slide. So in our first draft, the consultants did some research to kind of say what was the traditional development pattern of our residential lots. And so you can think of the main house up front, a drive on the side, they went back to a garage or carriage house at the rear, and then maybe a tank house, windmill, and shed. So that was a very typical development pattern for a long time in Fredericksburg. And so we've kind of captured those features. Next slide. And then looking at lot coverage. So this is a new section that we did not have in the first draft of the document. So saying that the lot coverage is something we're starting to see a lot of change to, and that this document might be a little bit more restrictive than the base zoning. And we are proposing to require a setback. So if you're going to have new units, new buildings on the back of a lot with an existing structure, that you've got to give it a certain amount of space. So we're proposing like 20 feet from a high rated structure, 15 feet from a medium rated structure. Next slide. So in the 1997 design guidelines, there was no idea of kind of infill construction that we're seeing now, where we're having multiple units placed on one lot, a lot of that coming from short-term rentals. So the 1997 design guidelines just talk about new construction in a very generic way and don't really have any way of thinking about lot coverage. Next slide. Next slide. So in our first draft, we had proposed no more than 2 historic auxiliary buildings on a parcel. We also considered reducing auxiliary buildings to 600 square feet. Next slide. The second draft did away with those, but again, still trying to look at the reality of what we're seeing and address those. So we are starting to see what we're terming an STR compound, a short-term rental compound, where we have a main historic house and then a grouping of other cottages. And what does that look like, and what impact does that have on that lot and then the neighbors? Next slide. So we have examples now that have been approved kind of 2 different ways, where you have a certain amount of open space and regular spacing, or just a cluster. So the previous slide being kind of the cluster, and this one on San Antonio Street, where the cottages just line up against the property line and go back and have a lot of open space. And so we're proposing this type as what's more appropriate for the development pattern. Next slide. One other proposed change would be in an R1 zone, that a footprint of a new auxiliary building would not cover more square footage than the primary building. Next slide. So this is an example of a real project that happened on West Travis Street that would meet that requirement. So an R1 zone footprint, in this case, the main house was 1,284 square feet, and then a new living area was built separate behind it and was spaced at about 15 feet, but it was limited to 966 feet. That's how they designed it. We didn't have any design guidelines to address this problem or potential problem. We just happened to actually kind of meet that. So a real life example of one that's been completed. And so we can kind of see what that looks like. Next slide. Next slide. So new construction, thinking about empty lots, of which there are a few in the historic district. And one of the main things that we heard when we did the public survey, we got a lot of responses back on appropriateness of new infill construction. Because what we're seeing is two things. We're seeing kind of the cottage development, multiple units, multiple small structures filling up a lot, or really large new homes in the residential area. Some people would term this a McMansion, and thinking about how that can impact the district with large homes built to the max, maybe 28 feet, kind of looming over a small cottage next to it, and how that impacts the feel of the historic district. So we've addressed two-story in this document, saying that would be allowed if you look at the block and how many houses that exist are already two stories. Next slide. So here's a recent example that was approved on West Schubert, and the contractor did this. They went out and surveyed and said, yes, this is what we see on the street. There's lots of examples of two-story homes on this block. And so we're proposing a two-story home, and this will be in keeping. And so it was approved because there was definitely a precedent. But we know that not all blocks are created equal, and they all have a different feel. So there was another example on Mistletoe where someone wanted to build two-story. And Mistletoe is such a small and very tight street that they decided that two-story was not in keeping with the district. So this just kind of codifies what the board has been doing already. Next slide. And this talks about new construction. So if the empty lot in question, there are not 50% of the structures that are over two stories, how that would be allowed, and that would be by doing a step back, which you see more often in commercial areas, that the front, if you think about the new hotel that's going to be built on Main Street, right, it's the same height as the commercial buildings on Main Street, but then it steps up as it steps back, it steps up. And so using the same concept for residential. Next. And then thinking about this draft of the document, looking at some changes that we made, just to say that there were changes made between the first and second draft based on those public meetings that we had, and we listened to the comments. So this is just an example of treating high and medium rated properties differently, and we kind of adjusted some of those requirements, especially here's an example for chimneys. But next slide. Some other formatting changes that we made was breaking down each topic into section, such as maintenance, alteration, or new construction. So it just makes the document flow a little better. Next slide. Also in the first draft, the consultants had architectural style and floor plan separate, thinking of the form of the building and the design of the building as two separate things. But in this, they try to combine both of those things. So you could kind of look at what style house is your house. Is it an L-plan cottage? Or an L-plan Tudor revival? So you can see all of that information at one place. Because this is where the Section 2, talking about the architectural history and the character of the building, is really where projects need to start. We really need to understand your house, your commercial building, to understand what are the character defining features. And so that's what we do here, is lay out and describe what are those character defining features, because that's how the board makes their decision, protecting those most important features. Also in this document, next slide, we wanted to make sure that we are This is local to Fredericksburg. This isn't just a document that we adopted from HHM that does this all over the state. This is specific to Fredericksburg. So for example, talking about our local cement block, right? There was cement block in the turn of the 20th century all over the country, but locally we had two producers. We had Rose Block and Bassey, and those are still very prominent, and people are proud of their Rose and Bassey block. So just calling out those features. Next slide. Another thing that we did was add a section on Hill Country Modern. Our contractors, our builders, our architects will tell you that when someone is building in Fredericksburg, when they're building in the Hill Country, this is kind of the look that they're going for. And so we wanted to acknowledge that as its own style and something that will be landmark worthy for future generations. So we just kind of defined that, the reality of what we're seeing in the historic district as far as new construction. All right, next slide. So the other thing that we're looking for from you tonight is some input on our public input. What does that look like to you? What kind of feedback do you need to hear from the general public to feel comfortable adopting this document in the coming months? So again, next slide. Where we are tonight versus the adoption process. And so if you feel that an open house is better, or a workshop, online survey, if we need to be doing this virtual and in person, any feedback you have on that, that's what we're looking for. Any questions?
Holly, I'll start on the left side. Holly?
Well, as far as the public process goes, I think we should both online and in person. I'm particularly interested in the impact of our guidelines on the availability of single-family owner-occupied homes in the historic district. I think we keep chasing the commercial and the STRs, but I think my concern is in looking at some of that come out, particularly the footprint issues, figuring out a way to encourage still the owner-occupied family homes in the historic district. I think because of our guidelines, I think we're pushing everything towards investment. And I think we need to just take a look at these and say, do these facilitate rehabilitating and constructing a single-family owner-occupied home in the historic district? Yes or no? Because the couple of the footprint items have me thinking that may be a concern. I like the footprint idea in terms of scaling down the guest house component on a property, particularly in R1 in the historic district. But my concern is around garages and storage spaces and utility spaces that modern families need in order to survive in a historic home. Because the historic homes typically don't have the bathroom space, they don't have the closet space, they don't have so a family is faced with doing a significant addition onto the home or putting a substantial garage barn structure in the home where they can put all their stuff and then utilize the historic home more in its historic context. So I'd like to see some discussions on the balance of those things, particularly as it relates to single family owner occupied with a family in it type homes for the historic district. Other than that, I read through the rest of the document. The rest of it I was fine with. I thought y'all created enough flexibility, mostly enough flexibility. I thought on the low value residences, I thought y'all were still a little strict, treating them more like mediums than lows. I didn't see a whole lot of distinction between low and medium.
Okay.
And so I would also challenge us to go back and look at, are we distinguishing medium and low enough to where it's a true distinction? Because when somebody walks into a low, if they're going to rehabilitate it, they got to tear all this stuff out. I mean, it's going to be a more expensive project if they're trying to bring it back. If it's already been damaged or significantly altered, taking those alterations out is more expensive. So I'd like to see a little more distinction between low and medium. Yeah, I'm into it. You are.
Yeah, well, I need to sit down and talk with you more. No, boy, reading through the document, I read it because anyway, so, no, there was a lot of thought in the process to go through everything, and I just don't want to see some of these buildings, they're classified sometimes as historic, and there's not a darn thing you can do with them. The foundation or the walls or something is just out of whack, and there's no way of preserving it and, make it look like it used to look, but use some products that are of quality material. That's my concern is, trying to go out and find wood from a 200-year-old mesquite tree so you can carve out a little window, and that'll cost you more than anything in the world. But keep it reasonable. We've talked about it.
Bobby?
As far as the public input, I would like to see public meetings along with online. I think when we were doing the road studies, we found that the workshops worked well, and I'd like to see that along with online, because some people might not like to come to the workshops. As far as the document, I know you've been through it several times. I thought it's well done. Both Polly and Jerry had some good comments, especially with older homes that are almost beyond repair. I think we need to take a more reasonable stand on how to repair those, as opposed to when essentially they should be torn down. But I know we want to preserve them. So, and from my understanding, a low-rated home, if the owner wanted to, they could tear it down. So I would like to see them remodeled, but I think a lot of people have been buying the low-rated homes, tearing them down and building things that aren't really appropriate in the neighborhoods. So I understand that standpoint. Thank you.
Tom?
I like the document. I think it adds to what we've been trying to do for historic preservation. I agree with much what Polly said today. A question I have, though, is when we're talking about the exceptions to standards, this is on page 118. I think we need to determine what criteria are developed that are going to be used to determine whether an exception to a standard should be granted. And then these criteria need to be consistent, so that I'm concerned about creating a precedent for later cases that come before the Historic Review Board. So I think it's very important that when we issue variances, we need to make sure that variance is going to be that we would issue it to somebody else under the same circumstances. The second thing about the number of members of the Historic Review Board, I understand that concept. I am in agreement with the idea of going to a 9-member board. I think the issue that we would have, though, is we currently have 10 members, but this summer, I think one of those members is up for renomination, and I would think that maybe at that time we could, maybe that person doesn't renominate themselves, and we go from 10 to 9, and at least with a 9-member board, you'd have 5 with a quorum, and you'd have enough people there that when members of the board had to recuse themselves, there would still be a substantial number of people that could be participating. The other question I had was on page 131 when we're talking about in R1 zoning, new to the draft, the footprint of any auxiliary building may not cover more square footage than the primary building. So I was looking at the diagram that's in here that shows the R1 living space of 966 square feet. The main house had 1284 square feet, and then the addition that was added was 966. So the question I have is, what happens if you have a main house that has 966 square feet? Are we going to allow an addition let's say that the small house is in the front, and are we going to allow them to build a 1,284 square foot addition in the back?
Connected to the existing?
No, this is non-connected. So the way that the draft says here is you can build a smaller one in the front. Are we going to allow them to build a bigger one? If they've got a lot with a small front in the house, I mean a small house in the front, are we going to allow them to build a bigger house in the back?
Right, according to this draft,
No.
that would be no.
Okay.
Well, and then again, I'd have a concern about that because the historic structure is the 900 square foot structure.
Right.
You know, a lot of times the best option is preserve that structure the way it is.
Right.
But to make the property a livable property, people need more square footage than that. So you'd be telling them they can do 900 in the front and 900 in the back, and that's it. Either that or they're doing a big addition on a really tiny house, which is can look really strange.
But you could approve an addition that's attached to the home. We're talking about a separate,
This is separate.
standalone
Doing a
building.
separate.
And
But
there
if
are
somebody chooses they want
many
to do
good
guest house in the
examples
front
of a
and
small
main house in
building,
the back.
many examples of a small building that's been added on by
Right.
twice the size, and the new addition does not jump out and bite you. It's still the historic building that
But I
you
can
tend
see
to
where,
see.
when you have these really tiny ones, like on my block, we've got ones that are 700. I mean, they are tiny. And they're at the very front of the property, so it would make more sense if you were gonna make that a guest house. That would be your guest accommodation or your
Well, that's the
in-back
footprint.
accommodation, and then put your living space at the back out of the way.
Right, and it says the footprint, so it could be a two-story in the back. There's other ways to look at it.
Yeah.
But we're seeing things that, you wouldn't think about, but there's a lot of pressure from the short-term rentals that we're seeing, treating our residential district differently, yeah.
Okay, I would encourage more heavily to in-person meetings, workshops, and also include the Zoom and whatnot. I've been to a couple of the public meetings, and I've been to one of the workshops, and I'm gonna tell you what, there's been a lot of time and effort put in by the community as well as your gang to come up with this. It's a well-written document. Is it perfect? No, there was no such thing as a perfect document, but I think y'all are trying to get to a point that can work for 96% of the people, and you have something built in this that can help people develop what they might want to develop. So I appreciate all the work you all have done, as well as the community in the workshops that I attended, so thank you.
Thank you.
When is the historic review board meetings?
The Historic Review Board meets the second Tuesday of the month, so their next meeting is April 14th.
And then I'd also agree with going with a 9-member board as opposed to 7 and 3.
You know the awkwardness of being the
I do.
alternate.
Okay, any further discussion, comments? Okay, this is just for discussion, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Okay, we'll move on to.
Thank you, Anna.
Yeah, thank you very much. Item 7C. Consider, discuss, and take action regarding an update on the flood early warning system project, which was first approved for the Flood Infrastructure Fund Program funding in December 2020. This would be Clinton Bailey or Garrett Bunn, and there's
You
Garrett.
got me.
Thank you.
Garrett Bond with the engineering department. Back in March of last year, the city applied for 2 projects under the Flood Infrastructure Fund, which is administered by the Texas Water Development Board. The first project was the North Llano Storm Sewer Project, which is a phased approach to address stormwater issues at the intersection of College and North Llano. The other project was the Flood Early Warning System Project, which we've discussed at length. It would include the installation of floodgates and stream gauges at 5 low water crossings throughout the city. Both of the proposals from the city proposed an 80% grant fund and 20% local match. Back in December, the city was notified that the flood early warning system project had been approved for funding. Unfortunately, the funding is in the form of 15% using grant funds, and the remaining 85% is the city's responsibility via a zero-interest loan that is repayable to the state over 30 years. So since that time, staff and the city's bond counsel and Daniel, the city attorney, have been working with the state, trying to come up with a plan that was acceptable to everyone. Unfortunately, during that process, we've encountered a number of major issues. The first one being that in order for these floodgates to cover the entire width of the wider city streets, they're limited to 25 feet in width. So in most cases, we're required to put in the equipment on both sides of the streets. This has led to concerns and objections from the neighboring property owners, as well as concerns from the Historic Review Board. All of these sites lie within the historic district, so a lot of the things that Anna brought up tonight, those were concerns that were mentioned. In addition, the state is putting a lot of additional requirements relating to environmental impacts and floodplain issues on the project, which limit the city's ability to move these equipment or pieces of equipment to address concerns. And then finally, unlike most funding opportunities, the state is requiring the city to pass a revenue bond ordinance to cover the city's loan or the local share. And of course, that's not a big deal at this point, but it could affect future funding opportunities that the city might have within the Drainage Enterprise Fund. So with that being said, here tonight to ask the council to reconsider the city's application for the funding and basically withdraw the grant application from the state. I don't think there's any penalties to the city. But what this would do is allow us to look at other options such as improved lighting in these areas and more standard signage that would hopefully address the public safety concerns and also address some of the concerns from the neighborhood and the historic preservation or the Historic Review Board, excuse me. So the other thing I wanted to mention is most of these other options we're looking at could be installed by city crews, so there would be some substantial cost savings to the city. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you have or discuss some of the options we've looked at.
Okay, I'm gonna start with you, Bobby.
I'm in favor of withdrawing the grant process.
Hey, Tom?
Is the state doesn't trust us to pay our debts?
I'm not really sure. This flood infrastructure fund program is new to the state as well. So it's there's a learning curve involved. Unfortunately, the city of Fredericksburg appears to be a guinea pig in this whole project or in the whole process. So Daniel can attest to this. We've had numerous conversations with the state. I think it's a good program, but it's just trying to figure out what the requirements are going to be.
Daniel, isn't our bond rating at least as good as the state's, if not better?
Is that a serious question you want me to answer?
I think that the answer to that is yes, but I agree with Councilman Watson.
Molly, I take it you're nodding yes?
Walk away.
Okay, Jerry?
Oh, definitely for that amount of, yes.
I'm in total agreement, and Garrett and I drove around all those locations, and I think, Tom, with the double arms, I said, if you can keep Charlie Keeney from driving through there, you've accomplished something.
Yeah.
And Tom said you can't,
That's hard to do.
yeah, you can't educate stupid, or can't fix stupid, so.
That's
I'll
Tim Dooley said that. Okay.
I'll entertain a motion then, is that what you're looking for?
So moved.
Is that what you need, Jerry?
It wouldn't hurt to
Okay.
have formal action.
To make a motion to withdraw the state grant application, that's what Jerry just.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
Okay, and I'll second that
We
motion.
have a
second that?
Yeah.
motion by Jerry and a second by Tom, any further discussion? No. There being none, all those in favor? Aye. Opposed, same. There is none. Motion carries.
Thank y'all.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to move to item 7D. Consider the hotel occupancy applications, and we do have one person who'd like to speak to that first. Here she comes. Amy.
Oh, this is
Biker.
Amy.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Biker.
Biker, and you live in the city, I see.
Yes, 140 Stone Canyon. And I'm Amy Biker with the Gillespie County Children's Foundation, and I'm seeking support or consideration for hot funds for our project Main Street Mockingbirds. And I think the easiest way to describe it, since it's a new project that we don't have anything really similar to, is to explain where the inspiration came from. We moved from Greenville, South Carolina. We were there for 1 year for some training my husband did. And the day we moved to town, our neighbors gave us this children's book. And it's kind of really a silly story, not a lot of connection to the town, but it served to get us on Main Street, to find the characters that are in the book hidden down in different buildings down their Main Street. And it was such a sweet introduction to the town. It made us, get off our phones and look and explore and notice architectural details with my kids that we would have missed. And it just got us all the way down Main Street, gave us a good family activity. And then every time someone came to visit us, it's like, oh, we got to show them my son Maine, give him the book. And when we moved, everyone gave us these little mice to remember Greenville by. And it was really sweet. And then we moved here, and our Main Street is so charming, and enjoying it with my kids, but realizing there's not as much to do for kids on Main Street. And then my daughter was in second grade at the public school, and they learned the history of Fredericksburg, and we went to the 2018 Easter fires. I'm like, not only do we have a charming Main Street, we have such a sweet story to share, and I want to share it with tourists, especially the youngest ones, and keep them on Main Street. So we wrote a children's book. It's a family of 9 mockingbirds. Mockingbird is the state bird of Texas. And the story sets up, they watch, the settlers come from New Braunfels, and as the town is set up and the treaty is signed, depending on the bird's personality and the original use of the building, is where you can find the bird.
Amy, I'm not going to interrupt you, but you do have 3 minutes. Okay. And there's no clock.
Oh, I don't know what my time is.
Well, I'm sort of like keeping time.
Okay.
But I want to listen also.
So, for example, this is Buck, and he is at the Bank of Fredericksburg, or also Headquarters Hats. And we have commissioned nationally renowned and local resident John Bennett to do the mockingbird sculptures. And this is not the best printout, but this is his mold casting of Buck. And it was fun going and meeting with him at Headquarters Hats, because he said, I never knew that Bank of Fredericksburg was engraved on Headquarters Hats, and I never appreciated the red cupola. And he's been here several years, so already just drawing some sweet detail to the building. So that is one example, and the sculptures. And this activity, it just renders an opportunity like no other in Fredericksburg, and highlights some of our greatest tourist attractions while promoting local commerce. It's not limited to weekends or a special event, but is available year-round, all day after other things have closed, and can appeal to tourists who are looking for less peak travel times. In 2019, according to a study by Core Research done by the CBB, 45% of visitors surveyed used Fredericksburg as a family vacation, but many noted the desire for more youth activities for their visiting children, and were somewhat disappointed in our offerings. Susan Corbell presented the research to the CVB, noted that these findings ring a lot of bells for people who may be deciding between visiting a theme park or coming here, and a board member of the CVB voiced concern that families were cutting their vacation short after running out of things to do with their kids. Providing a family-friendly activity entices more families to visit and keeps them here longer. Families have different needs and will support tourism and accommodations differently than couples and singles. And unlike other potentially kid-friendly attractions, this activity holds limited liability and involves a large portion of town, while utilizing Fredericksburg's current footprint and layout, not, putting a big structure somewhere. It blends well with our artistic culture and our historical culture, and just seeks to keep that involved in our tourism and seeks to keep children as part of our tourism.
Amy, thank you. There's nothing more important than kiddos to me. Thank you for your comments.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Sorry about the time.
No problem.
Okay. Okay, we're going to open up this big packet. The way we would like to handle this is I'm going to announce the folks who have applied for funding. And then I'm going to ask if there's any questions from council for those folks, if there's any questions. And at that time, if there are, we'll do that. If there's a representative here to come forward. Is it necessary to put in the amount of money they're asking for, or just the name? Just the name, okay. The first one is going to be, and if you all will look at the funding, and, Daniel, I do want to ask, all of these people that have applied have met all the recommendations by the state or for the hot fund applications, is that correct?
That's correct. I reviewed all the applications. They all meet the minimum legal threshold with the requirements for funding or for expenditure of the HOP funds. My analysis is really black and white. I just look to make sure that there's some kernel of evidence in their application that meets the requirements under the statute. It's up to the council to decide. Some of these are based on projections of attendance and things like that, so it's up to council to decide, the credibility of those numbers that are in these applications and whether they think it's an appropriate or the best use of the HOP funds for those particular projects. But every application that was submitted at least has enough evidence in the application to make the findings that it complies with law.
Thank you, Daniel. Okay, we have 24 applicants. The first one on my list is the Gillespie County Fair and Festivals Association. Is there anybody on council that may have a question for them? Tom?
Yeah, Mayor, I have a question that they are asking for, I think, $20,000 more than last year, and they're referencing a substantial increase in cost to have horse races. So I know we've provided money to them for advertising. So the question I have is, we don't provide money to actually put on the event. Is that correct, Daniel?
Are you asking about the sporting event?
Well, yes. I mean, I guess they're classifying this as a sporting event.
Yes, I couldn't find a definition of sporting event or anything that excluded this from being a sporting event. Horse racing's on ESPN. I guess that's sufficient. I don't know.
It has horses. Those are.
So for sporting events where a majority of the participants are from out of the area,
okay,
you can't. Direct expenses related to the event itself can be funded with HOT.
Okay.
Any other questions on that one? Okay.
They're asking 65,000 from us and the county's only putting in 20,000. I just don't understand. I think, what are we going to do here? We're going to start taking this, and we're $33,000 over our $480,000. So we got to cut $34,000.
Or do we?
Huh?
Or do we? So my question to Kent
Yeah.
is, where are we on hot collections this year?
Do you want to get into the funding discussion tonight, rather than just go through the applications?
Just If you can just answer the question, are we ahead or behind on hot collection?
We're way ahead. When we developed the budget last summer, of course, we were right in the middle of COVID, so we took a very conservative approach to our revenue projections. Our total revenue that we anticipated from hot this year was $3.46 million, which works out to about $866,000 a quarter. And for the first quarter, we collected $1.2 million, so about over $300,000 more than what we had budgeted. So the council chooses to fund all the requests, then there is money available to do that.
But I think our goal tonight is just this presentation, and then we'll have to chew it down or whatever we might want to do to it.
Yeah, but I just didn't want us to use the budget overage as the reason to cut.
Right, we're not deciding somebody gets it and somebody doesn't tonight, so that's my understanding. Okay. Okay, the next applicant is the Chamber Christmas Parade. Any questions or concerns on that? And number 3, the Optimist Hill Country Run. Questions? No. The Fredericksburg Fredericksburg food and wine. Questions?
No, we know them well enough.
Well, the question that we had last year was that this is a city-sponsored event, so why should we be paying hot funds for a city-sponsored event? That was our issue last year with this event.
Okay.
And
the city can expend the funds directly for any of the lawful purposes under the statute. You know, typically the situation here has been that it's given to these local entities and then they expend it as a sub-grantee or as a grantee, whatever you want to call it. But the statute's written in a way that conceivably the city could just fund, the city could advertise on its own or could host events on its own as long as they meet the statutory requirements. I guess what I'm saying is there's no restriction on funding an event that's a city event.
Well, that's the issue, I guess, or we could just give the Market Square Redevelopment Commission another $10,000 to put toward the square.
I mean, that's a council decision where you want to get your money to fund it.
okay.
Okay. Number 5, Oktoberfest. Any questions?
Dr. Lieber.
I hope it comes.
Yeah.
My lederhosen are shrinking. I shouldn't have washed them. Friends of the Gillespie County Schools. Questions or concerns?
No.
Nope. J.C. Crawfish Festival, number 7.
Nope. They're good.
Okay. Number 8, Farmers Market.
Definite.
Nope. Number 9, the Admiral Nimitz Museum Complex.
Definite.
Nope. Number 10, der Staatsski Friedhof. Oh, I know I slaughtered that. The Fredericksburg Theater Company.
No question.
The Fredericksburg Music Club Incorporated.
Not a question.
Fort Martin Scott Friends.
Nope.
The Kunstler von Fredericksburg.
Nope.
The Hill Country Film Society. The Gillespie County Historical Society.
What are they looking at funding with that extra? Is that a maintenance or need to talk to Hoover or what?
Oh, that's the next one. That's on.
Gillespie.
No, 17, right?
No, 16.
No, 16 is $90,500 for the historic interpretation.
How much?
$90,500.
Yeah.
Number 17, the Gillespie County Historical Society Public Restrooms.
Okay, I have a question about this one, is that I think council needs to be made aware of any kind of an agreement that was made for the Uptown Visitor Center. If the $3,795 is to clean the restrooms at the Uptown Visitor Center, then it would seem to me that we might make that, since the Uptown Visitor Center is a part of the Visitor Information Center that is funded by the CVB, it would seem to me that perhaps we need to make this a line item in the CVB budget so that if the Historical Society is having to clean the restrooms for for the public, then maybe we should fund that as the same way that we fund cleaning the restrooms of the VIC. And it shouldn't even be a bed tax issue.
Well, it ends up being a bed tax issue as we fund the CVB.
Well, it is,
but you're saying add it as a line item to their budget going forward.
Right, and so that we don't have to come up, every year. And it would seem that the Historical Society could at least get with the city or get with the CVB. Here's what it's costing us to do this as a public service.
So then would we just make it part of next year's budget, we'd ask the CVB to add that as a line item to their budget.
Right, that's my feeling.
Or can we add it to the city's budget?
Well, we want to use hot.
We can do it either way, anyway. We'll just propose to use hot funds either.
Pay it out of hot.
Pay it out of hot, but it could be a city line item.
It could come out of the, I guess,
It's all out of the tourism fund, so whether you fund it here or you fund it as a line item out of the tourism fund.
Either put it in the tourism fund or the CVB budget, one or the other.
Either way.
Okay.
Going forward. But do you want to go ahead and prove it for this one time and then make that for next year's budget that we change how we handle it?
I would think so, yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Former Texas Rangers celebrate Texas, number 18.
I do have a question on this one. So, and I don't know if there's anybody here who represents the Rangers.
And if you'll introduce yourself, please. And you're not a Texas Ranger, that's not a badge, I checked that out.
That's correct. No, I'm Dr. Jody Gann, I'm the Executive Director of the Texas Rangers Heritage Center.
Okay, so my question was, in your application, you put the annual attendance at 125? Is that accurate? Was that a COVID issue last year?
Last year, oh, right, it was down.
What had it been, what was it in prior years? The attendance, do you know?
Let me see if I have it. It would have been triple. But I'll have to get the. My apologies, I don't have that number handy, but I can.
It's just $20,000 for that low of an attendance figure seems.
That was a COVID number. That was, we held that event literally as the COVID restrictions were coming into place, so people just did not show.
Okay.
Can you get us the year before's attendance?
Yes, sir, I can get that.
That'd be great.
Jody, if you'll just send it to me, I'll get it to the council.
Yes, sir.
Good.
Thank you.
That's it, thank you.
We probably have the applications they've made over the past few years that would possibly have that information on it.
Okay.
That we may have already at City Hall.
Okay.
Number 19, the former Texas Ranger history.
No question.
Number 20, Stonewall Chamber of Commerce. 21, the Fredericksburg Art Guild.
No.
Number 22, the Fredericksburg Rotary Club Foundation Incorporated Craft Beer Festival.
Don't like it.
23, Heritage School Eisenbaum. And number 24, that we had the little talk on, the Gillespie County Children's Foundation. Okay.
I like this.
Now, just for clarification for me, we know who's applied, so what's the next process, Kent? And for these folks?
The next agenda, your next council meeting will be scheduled for approval. And so if you have any questions between now and then that you'd like to ask applicants, if you get those to Shelley, and she will try to get all your questions answered prior to your decision at the next meeting 2 weeks from tonight.
Okay. that would probably be a good opportunity for the representatives to be here as well, for an opportunity to speak if they would like to. So, thank you all for that. Okay. Moving on, item number 8, city manager report. The first one being the annexation schedule, Post Oak Road area.
Mayor and council, as you are well aware, the annexation of the Post Oak Road area has been on the annexation plan the city adopted a couple of years ago. We actually started the process when Brian Jordan was here. But we ran into a conflict as far as meeting locations. We had advertised a public hearing at one location that we couldn't, and this council decided you didn't want to have any more public meetings at the law enforcement center. So we had to kind of restart the process. And so we are restarting it now. We're sending out letters to the property owners next week, and you can look forward to the public hearings for this annexation to take place in June in order to get the word out, the notices and hearings and so forth. We'll have the first public hearing in June. The second public hearing, well, actually, both public hearings will be in June, and then the council is scheduled to institute annexation on July 6th, your meeting on July 6th, and sometime between July 6th and October 4th, you can consider the actual annexation of this property. And again, as you will recall, one of the reasons the council identified this property for annexation was because of the roadway improvements that we were planning in this area. So Jason will be coordinating this process. We're restarting it, and you can look forward to public hearings coming up this summer, and hopefully final action late this summer. Any questions on that?
None?
Okay. All right. Next item, we have restarted the STR ordinance review process again. Again, this is something we started last year. Brian Jordan retired. We wanted to wait till Jason came on board to get his input and involvement in the review and possible revision of our short-term rental ordinance. And meantime, we got some direction from the council that you wanted to make sure we had an extensive public input process before we brought forward any amendments to our ordinance. So that public input process will be starting next month in May. We'll be having an open house workshop for invite the citizens to come out, focus on the property owners that are in areas where short-term rentals are located to get their input, get their ideas and suggestions. Then we will have a council workshop this summer, and the proposed revisions will be developed based upon input from the public, the reservation agencies, city council, and then it'll go before the Planning and Zoning Commission for hearing. City council will have a hearing on the ordinance, and it's scheduled for your consideration late this summer in August. If we do come forward with some amendments, we would bring those forward to the council anticipated in August. So again, we want to allow plenty of time for public input. That'll take at least 2 or 3 months. Then we'll develop the proposed ordinance, have some additional public meetings, and approval in August. Any questions on that? Okay, the next major process that we'll be starting here very shortly in a couple of weeks is what we call the mid-year budget review. With April, the 1st of April now has arrived, and so we're halfway through our fiscal year. And so we always take this opportunity to review our budget after 6 months, see where we stand, and see if there's any budget amendments that we need to bring forward to the council to consider. This year is a very unusual year, and it will require a number of budget amendments that we'll be asking the council to consider. And a lot of these are related to unanticipated expenses regarding COVID, purchase of supplies, materials, overtime costs, and other expenses related to the city's response to COVID. Fortunately, we do have offsetting revenues to cover those expenses, so we'll be looking at budget amendments for both the revenues and expenses related to COVID. And the same is true with the storm response. We had a lot of unbudgeted expenses for the city's response to the storm. We are anticipating FEMA reimbursement for FEMA to cover those expenses, so those will require budget amendments. We also had a council approval of changes to TMRS benefits, and those will require some budget amendments. So we've got a lot of budget amendments for the council to consider this year. So what we would like to do is, after the election in May, is have a city council work session sometime around mid-May to discuss the mid-year budget issues, and it will take some time to work through them this year because of the numbers involved, and then hopefully have amendments to the budget ready for your consideration at your May 17th meeting, possibly the first meeting in June. But anyway, I wanted to kind of forewarn you that the mid-year budget process is starting, and it will be a lot more involved this year.
So I have a question for that, Kent. So the mid-year budget process, our second meeting in May is the 17th.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Is that also when we certify the vote? Are we going to do that before then?
We have to do it before then.
Okay. I would make a suggestion that if we're going to be talking about the budget at the 17th, then usually on Monday, the 3rd of May, I think that we need to contact whoever the newly elected members of the city council are and bring them up to date as to, what's going on with budget amendments, what's going on with the city. You might start at that time, your council, the council briefing that you did after the last election. That's 2 weeks is a really short time to start drinking a lot of information out of a fire hose in 2 weeks. So, I'm confident that people can understand the process, but I don't want people to walk into the budget workshop and not have any background.
Okay, thank you, Tom. So noted. Any other questions on that? Okay, item D on the city manager's report is just a quick update on the middle school campus. And we won't have any sort of detailed report on this tonight, but I did want to let the council know that the independent school district is still looking at a possible bond election in November. No final decision has been made on that election. But if the election does go forward and the bonds are approved for a new middle school, then the question is, what will become of the current middle school campus? So the Fredericksburg Independent School District has created a citizens committee that's looking at the reuse of the campus, again, assuming the election will pass. And we are fortunate to have two representatives on that committee, Councilman Tom Musselman and Garrett Bond. And so they are meeting and they are actively involved in taking a look at potential reuse of the existing campus. Last week, Tom and Garrett met with city staff, other city staff members, me and Clinton, Jason, and Anna, and Shelley to talk about, again, you talk about our ideas and concerns and questions regarding the reuse of the campus. I can tell you that because of the challenges involved in this decision, it would be impossible for us to bring forward a final recommendation to council prior to the November election. There's too many questions that have to be answered. There's too much evaluation that's required for the buildings and the layout and so forth. But we are at least starting the process of looking at reuse, starting to work through the questions involved in that, and we will keep the council updated. In fact, if we have a work session in mid-May, we may want to add this to the work session. In the meantime, I've contacted the architectural firm that assisted the city when we last looked at new offices for city staff. We were looking at a new city hall at that time, and they have some information that needs to be updated. Today, I received a proposal from them on the cost for updating that information, and that is another item that we will talk about during the mid-year budget. If the council wants to proceed on looking at potential reuse of some of the buildings over there, we would bring to you this proposal from this architect for your consideration as far as mid-year budget. So that's really my basic brief report on that. And at this time, I'd like to turn to either Tom or Garrett and see if they have anything to add since they're members of that committee.
Garrett and I went to the meeting with Dr. Williamson and some other members of the community. I'm not sure that the FISD has an absolute plan as to what they want to do with that piece of property. They have mentioned moving, the idea of moving Gillespie County High School over there, the idea of moving Billy Daycare over there. I think one of the issues is what buildings they would want to use and what buildings would be left. That's one issue. I think there's other issues that I think that we should talk about. I sent a memo to Kent, and he's got my thoughts on this. I don't know if he can disseminate that, or he will disseminate that at some point. So this, as far as I'm concerned right now, this is really in the lap of the FISD. So I think that all we should do is look and say, how feasible is it for the city of Fredericksburg to do anything or to be involved in any way on that campus? And I think that's a discussion that the five of us need to have with staff.
Yeah, again, I don't think any of us want to get too far ahead of the council on this issue, so we wanted to make sure that we're moving in the direction the council wants us to. Polly and I were involved in a discussion a week or so ago with the Community Visioning Steering Committee, and they identified this as an opportunity, and I think that's the way we need. It is an opportunity, but whether we want to pursue that opportunity, again, will be up to the city council, and we'll need your direction here in the near future on that issue.
Right, and I think another thing is that we really don't have the input of the elected members of the FISD school board. So we don't know, it's their property, and we don't know what they plan to do with it. They can say that they don't want to sell it, but we don't know that. They don't know that. They have an election coming up just like we do.
Okay, moving on, the last item is just a legislative update, and the last couple of meetings I haven't taken time to give you an update because we've run late in the meeting, so I did want to give you just a quick update tonight. A couple of bills that are making their way through the process in Austin now that affect the city. First off, I want to let you know our bill that this council supported that would allow up to 10% of hot revenues to be used for park improvements. That's House Bill 1469. That's got support from about 20 cities around the state. Senator Buckingham is the sponsor in the Senate. Representative Zwiner from Dripping Springs area is the House sponsor. That bill has not been set for hearing yet, so it's still up there being considered, but so far no committee hearing on that bill. There is one bill coming up tomorrow that I know you've heard a lot about, and that's Senate Bill 10 coming to the Senate hearing tomorrow. That's the bill that would prohibit city councils, county organizations, school board organizations from using public money to represent their interest in Austin before the legislature. So in other words, we cannot spend money for the Texas Municipal League, the county cannot spend money to the county association, and the school districts cannot spend money to the school board association to represent their interest before the state legislature. TML is calling it a community censorship bill, but in any case, it is going before the Senate hearing tomorrow, so I want to make you aware of that, and there's a lot of concern around the state about that bill, particularly from city, county, and school officials. Another bill that's coming up, there's a lot of discussion on open meetings bills because of what's happened during COVID. A lot of discussion about how the state wants to change and possibly expand the ability of the governing body to hold remote meetings. So, there's a lot of discussion about remote meetings now and changing the law there. We have a bill on sales tax coming up to the House and Ways and Means Committee tomorrow. And Polly, you might be interested in this. This is sales tax sourcing. It would generally provide for the purpose of city sales taxes. All sales of taxable items are consummated at the location in the state to which the item is shipped or delivered, or at which possession is taken by the purchaser. So in other words, wherever that item is delivered, that's where the sales tax is charged and collected.
Oh, shoot. So that'll be a big impact.
Yeah.
If we have to do it at the point of delivery as opposed to the point of origin, yeah, that's going to be a big deal.
Yeah, but the flip side of that is what's coming in here. I mean,
Correct, but since it'll affect online sales.
For sure.
The stuff they buy in the stores here will still be here.
yeah.
Yeah, that's what it's about.
So a lot of bills related to electrical utilities that are, and whether those will pass, it's unknown at this point because of, there's a lot of conflicting positions between the Senate and the House on some of these bills. And the governor and the lieutenant governor are disagreeing on some of the major bills on electrical utilities. The other area that's of interest to us is there are several broadband bills that are pending. It looks like there may be some new funding available for communities to expand and improve broadband services. So we're tracking that. Tim Lindbergh is tracking those bills, and the state seems to be committed to working with local communities in their efforts to expand broadband. So we're tracking some of those bills. So that's really all I have to report on that, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Okay, moving on to items for future agendas.
Okay, Mayor and Council, in your packet, the last 2 pages in the packet are the pending items for April 19th and May the 3rd, and I'll just mention a couple of changes on the pages that you have there. Okay, so for April 19th, again, we'll be bringing back the SACO annexation agreement. Hopefully that'll be all ready for your consideration. That'll be a major discussion item, I'm sure. We don't, of course, need to do anything on zoning. It's just the annexation agreement. We will also have our annual audit report to present to you at the next meeting. We'll have the approval of the HOT allocations action. We will take off item 5, request for proposals for the Hotel Conference Center. We won't be ready to go on that. There's no rush to get that item before the council. And but you can see there's quite a few items scheduled for your next meeting for your consideration. Any questions on any of those items?
Will we get an update on item number 7, which is the annexation of some property across from the airport?
Jason's working on that.
Yes, we're actually hoping to try and get them in to start the annexation agreement probably at our next meeting to see at least a draft. This property is, I believe, 14 plus acres across from the airport. They're looking at an RV project type development. They're requesting zoning at this time, so we have to move forward with those zoning requests, but we want to get an annexation agreement from y'all. The issue, I believe, is just whether we want to determine the actual zoning for the property. Obviously, the extension of utilities would be on the applicant, so those are some issues we need to work out and get in front of council.
So will you have an estimate for the council as to how much it would cost the city to extend utilities over there? Because I understand it's going to, any extension of utilities would require boring under Highway 16?
Quite possibly. There's 2 routes, most likely that would require boring. There's some other options that might be available. I don't know that we'll have numbers on those, but from the staff perspective, this is any voluntary annexation at this point would be on that landowner to extend those utilities to serve their project, especially given the proposed use. There may not be an option for a lot of sales tax revenue to collect back on that. So those are conversations we're kind of having ongoing with the applicant.
Okay, we could have those conversations at this next meeting then too.
Hopefully, yes, sir.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the next meeting? If not, May 3rd, you can see the May 3rd, we don't have anything really scheduled so far. However, I want to let you know the mayor has requested, we add a discussion item on our current restrictions on tents, placement of tents in the historic district. And so we'll have that added to the May 3rd council agenda. Any other comments or questions on future agenda items?
What did we talk about today, Ken? What did I ask you about? Annexation was one, and can't remember, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'll get back with you.
Council comments, I'll start on my left.
Oh.
Go ahead, I'm sorry, Jerry.
Relief route. That was it, talking about the relief route and that too.
Okay, I got, Garrett is trying to set up a meeting with TxDOT right now, and hopefully we can schedule that, and then we'll have an update after that meeting.
Okay.
Council comments, Polly?
Just want to remind everybody, I'm having a workshop tomorrow night at St. Joseph Hall at 6 p.m. The topic's going to be unpacking affordable housing and utilization of hot taxes. So it's kind of a relevant topic for tomorrow. We can hold about 120 people at the hall, so it'll be pretty much first come, first serve, whoever gets there. And when we reach 120, if we reach 120, we'll say that's all folks. So thank you.
Jerry?
I just want to say, everybody keeps talking about how we're trampling their rights and getting on their constitutional rights, and it goes both ways. You're not going away, and we're not going away. I'll do everything I can do in order to maintain my rights. Talk about the emergency declaration. The emergency declaration is funding that the state, the county, and the city get for disasters. The legislature hasn't said what that money can be used for, but I think I would be pretty stupid to turn down $600 and something thousand at one time and $2.5 million the next time. I think that's not showing very much there. And besides, if you want to complain, why don't you go over to the county? The county's supposed to get $5 million over there, and I have been to several meetings with the county, and nobody's ever over there at the county. You want to complain about that? Go over there and complain some. I could keep going. You're griping or whatever.
Okay.
Oh, that ain't going to go nowhere anyway.
Okay,
Okay, I'm done.
We won't handle that one. Okay, Tom?
I'm glad to see the political activity in our community. I applaud the people who have put themselves out with the possibility of having to take abuse for the next 2 years. I would like to thank James McDonald for the beautiful sign that he's put across from my house. And the reason is I see this sign every day, and this sign has got all the lettering specified by the Texas Ethics Commission. It's for City Council. It even has a right-of-way declaration form on it, which is required by state law. And I'm glad to see that James has got all the required information on his. I think Tom Marshall's got all on his. If you don't have it all on yours, you need to look at your signs, and there are ways to do that. When I ran for re-election, I had some, my first re-election, I didn't want to print new signs, so I just made some signs and stuck them on my signs for the re-elect. You can do the same thing if you don't have the right-of-way declaration. You can create stickies that you can put at the bottom of your sign. And if you don't have 4 on your sign, you can stick a 4 on there. So there's a reason why we have specific rules by the Texas Ethics Commission for political advertising, and I would hope that everybody who's running for political office would abide by those rules. Thank you very much. I like the colors of your sign, James. They really stand out.
Bobby?
No comment.
I don't have any at this time either, and I hope that everyone had a happy and joyous Easter and remained safe and were able to stay and hug and kiss their family, especially grandkids, moms and dads, if you're fortunate still to have them. With that, we will entertain going into executive session.
I'm going to go from a regular session into executive.
Second.
I will read now why we're going in. And I have a let me read it first and then we'll vote. The city council will recess in its open meeting and reconvene in executive session pursuant to Texas Government Code Section 551.071, pending litigation with an attorney, and 551.072, deliberation regarding real property. Consider and discuss Alpha Securities LLC applicant versus City of Fredericksburg, Appleby, pending in the Court of Appeals in the Fourth Appellate District of San Antonio on an appeal from cause number 15377 in the 216th Judicial District Court of Gillespie County, Section 551.071, and consider and discuss the purchase, exchange, and lease of value of real property located in the vicinity of US 290 at the Pedernales River crossing approximately 2 miles east of the city of Fredericksburg, Section 55102. I have a motion to go from regular session by Tom and a second by Jerry and a second by Tom. All those in favor? Aye. Motion carries, and we'll be going into executive session after a 3-minute recess. We'll give you folks times to leave as need. Anybody's out,
Come on, Tom.
out front before we do that?
Oh, do we need to?
So I'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Have a motion by Bobby, second by Jerry. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? There is none. Motion carries.
Good night.
Good night, everybody. Have a good evening.